Abortion happens every day. Millions of people around the world will have an abortion each year. But the majority of those people will never talk about their abortion experiences. What if millions of people broke their silence and told the truth about their lives and their choices? This is Melissa Madera in Chaplin, Connecticut, and you're listening to the Abortion Diary podcast. These are the stories we share.
When I was young, I was precocious and I started having sex at 14, which was unusual back then. And at 16, I got pregnant. And my father was a doctor and my mother was a nurse, but I managed to hide the pregnancy from them until I was 5 months pregnant. And we went on vacation and they saw me in a bathing suit. And the first thing they saw what was happening. And my mother said to my father, "Can you fix this?" Now, abortion was illegal, but he apparently arranged them all the time for his friends, with other doctors. He said, "It's too late." So I had a baby. I was hidden at home. It was a very traumatic, shameful situation, especially because my family was of a certain status. And so afterwards, she was given up for adoption, and I was told I would never see her again. It was a girl. And I got some therapy, and my father's advice was, forget this ever happened and go to college. Well, I did. And I went to a gynecologist because I had been on the pill after my daughter. I'd stolen birth control pills. You couldn't go to Planned Parenthood back then. They would only treat married women over 21 or something. So my father had a sample room and I would go in and steal pills and take them, birth control. But I didn't want to be on them anymore. I was a freshman in college and I decided to get off the pills. So I went to a doctor and I asked for a diaphragm. And I used it and I got pregnant. And I went to the gynecologist in my hometown who was one of my father's best friends. And I said, "Please don't tell my father." He said, "I won't, but I'm going to have to tell your mother because she's going to have to bring you." And abortion was going to be legalized within weeks. And he had just bought this equipment to perform it in his office. And he said, "You'll be the first one that I use the equipment on." And when I told my mother, I find this a little bit funny. I said, "Mommy, it's not my fault." He also looked at the diaphragm and said, "This was the wrong size. Don't ever go back to that doctor." And I never did. I said, "Mommy, it's not my fault, but I got pregnant again." And she said, she was Southern, and she said, "Syra, you've got to stop doing this," which is almost funny. But she agreed to take me and not tell my brother and sister or my father. So one night she took me to his office and it happened, and it wasn't too painful or anything. And I was pretty dopey afterwards. I guess they gave me something, and she had to bring me home and help me get in the house. And I remember my siblings who were older saying, "What's wrong with her?" And my mother said, "She's just had her period. She doesn't feel good." And I went to bed. And then it was done. That was it. I didn't have regrets. It didn't affect my fertility. I went on, when I was older and married and ready, I had two sons and no real problems with pregnancy. So that's my abortion story. It was illegal, but it was done in a doctor's office with the same equipment that a legal abortion would have used. I was very lucky that way. And I didn't even have to pay for it. So that's it.
The doctor didn't charge you any money?
No, he was a friend of the family. Back then, doctors gave each other's families, what do they call it? I don't know. They didn't charge. Our dentist didn't charge because my father would take care of his kids, and I don't know, professional courtesy. That was a big thing back then. Doesn't exist anymore. I wouldn't know, but I don't think it does. So It wasn't that bad. I mean, it was a vacuum. He had this brand new equipment because abortion, like I said, was about to be legal within weeks. And my sister was getting married, and I was supposed to be the maid of honor. And this doctor knew that. He was a friend of the family. And he said, let's just do this before the wedding so you won't. So I wasn't showing or anything. So it was fine. I felt a slight cramping. And then I was dopey, and my mother took me home, and I went to bed, and I was bleeding, but everything was fine. So I was lucky that way.
How did you know that you could go to him?
Well, my older brother had heard that I was pregnant when I was 16, and he came to me. And he said, Malcolm, that was the doctor, he said, if you're pregnant, I can help you. Malcolm will take care of it. Because his best friend's sister had gotten pregnant, and my brother called Malcolm, and they took care of it. You know, I found out, like I said, my father arranged many abortions with Malcolm, who was a brilliant doctor. And so I knew he would help me. I went to him, and he did. That's how I knew.
It just happened to be that the first time was just too late.
No, I didn't trust my brother. I had a plan. My brother came to me before they found out. He'd heard a rumor in town, and I denied it. And my plan was I had stolen a bottle of sleeping pills from my father. So he had this sample room. He used to get all kinds of samples, and they were easy to take. And I also stole a hypodermic. And I thought, I'm either going to take all these pills or I'm going to shoot air in my veins. And I had an old teddy bear, and I ripped it open and put them in there and hid the teddy bear in my old toy box in my bedroom under a window seat. And I never got around to using either thing because it just didn't happen. And Amy says to me now, thank you for having me. She doesn't have kids. She doesn't want kids, and that's fine. I would never tell anyone, have kids, have kids. My son used to think I didn't want him to have kids because I never said, when are you guys going to have kids? Because he was married. He was with his girlfriend since high school, and he accused me. I said, that's not my place to tell you anybody to have kids. That's your call, not mine. And I can't stand it when women do that to their children and say, well, I want grandbabies. That's not right.
The first time you got pregnant and you gave your daughter up for adoption, did your parents give you sort of any choice about that?
No, there was no choice. Back then, in white families, there was a huge scandal. I've since learned that in a lot of African American families, they kept their kids. They'd either have an aunt or a grandmother or somebody keep the child in the family. No, that didn't happen. And there was a point where my mother, she was from the South. She did offer me once during the pregnancy. She was so supportive and kind to me. She said, if you really want to keep the baby, I'll help you, and we'll go live in Georgia. And that's where she was from. And I'll help, but you're going to have to leave your father. And I was 17. I was like, no, I can't deal with that. They wouldn't even let me see her when she was born. And I was told I would move on. When I asked if I could see her, the social worker said, oh no, that's not a good idea. You'll have that little face to remember forever. That's bad. So, and I was treated pretty badly. I joined a birth mothers group in Ithaca many years later. A friend of mine had adopted 2 children, and she knew about the adoption triad, which is birth parents, adoptive parents, and adoptees. And she'd been involved in these organizations. So she said, you need to find your daughter. I want you to come to a meeting. And I did. And I met the Ithaca Birth Mothers group. And there were like a dozen women whose stories, everybody's story was really similar. And so I started reading books, and I knew about registries because I always wanted to be found. I've kept my maiden name, and there's a New York State adoption registry that's free, and I had registered. It was like a small fee. And then there were these other ones where you had to pay like a certain amount of money every month. And when I did the New York one and she didn't contact me, I thought, why am I going to throw money at something if she doesn't want to know me? Well, then I heard about one that was free. It's called the Soundex Reunion, International Reunion Registry. It was free. It was in one of the books I read from the Birth Mothers group. And I thought, what have I got to lose? So I filled out the form. I remember being at the mailbox thinking, here goes nothing, putting it in. And one day, a few weeks later, I'm driving in my car and the radio, a song came, an old song by the Moody Blues called I Know You're Out There Somewhere. And I had to pull over because it felt like a lightning bolt. I felt like I'm going to find her. I just knew it. So a couple of weeks later, I got home from work, and my husband, of course, knew all about this. And I have two sons. My older son at the time was 11 or 12. My younger son was 8 or 9. My younger son is handicapped. He's not 100%. He has a seizure disorder, and he isn't 100% normal. And he had had a birthday recently. And that particular day, I had promised the kids, because Caleb had money in his pocket, that when we got done back from school and did homework or whatever, had a snack, we would go back to town and I would take them to Woolworths because Caleb wanted to spend his money. So I get home and John pulls me aside and says, you got a phone call. And it was from Soundex. And it said, we think we found your daughter. And I flipped out. He said, go in my shop. He has a woodworking shop away from the house. I'll deal with the kids. You go call. So I called. This is around 3 p.m. They're in Nevada. Nobody answered, no answering machine. I freaked out. I came back. I said, they're not answering. He said, wait a minute. It's Nevada. It's 3 hours earlier. They probably went out for lunch. Wait 15 minutes and go. Now, I had never told my kids about this. They were too young, I felt. It wasn't, I just didn't feel like it was appropriate. Maybe if I'd had daughters, I would have told them, but no, I didn't. And so I went back after 15 minutes and somebody answered the phone. Sure enough, he was chewing on a sandwich. He said, oh, I'm so sorry, I just left for lunch. He said, well, we think we have a match. What do you know about your daughter? And what did I know? I knew that I said I wanted her raised Jewish because I was raised half Jewish. And I figured Jews respect education and often have money and that she'd be secure. I knew that her father was a lawyer and that her mother was in college or had gone to college and she would be their first child. And that's all I knew. And they said, bingo. Oh, and I knew what hospital she was born in. I said, that's her. They said, she's waiting by the phone to hear from you. So I went back in the house and I was crying and I called my kids in and I said, I have something to tell you. And I was crying. And my older son, who was very smart, he's the one who died recently, he said, well, did we do something? I said, no, you didn't do anything. I have something to tell you. When I was 17, I had a baby and I had to give her away. And now I found her and you have a sister. And he started crying. And he said, I'm going to call her in a minute. And he said, I want to talk to her too. And he did. And my younger son said, are we still going to Kmart? Because it didn't mean that much to him. So that was the beginning. And that was in 93. And I have known her for 23 years now. And we're very, very, very close. We're like best friends. When my son died, she came up here. She lives in North Carolina. And it was funny when we were getting to know each other. We stayed up the whole first night when she came, just like, what's your favorite color? What do just all these questions. What kind of music do you like? And at one point she said, there's something I have to tell you. I'm kind of ashamed. I said, you can tell me anything. She said, I had an abortion. I said, so did I. I said, it's not an issue. I'm totally pro-choice. And she's like a miracle in my life. She's such a miracle. She can do no wrong. I adore her. And she feels the same way about me. We feel very, very lucky that we really get each other, and we love each other, and we can laugh together, and we can cry together. And and my feeling after going through having a baby and giving it away and having an abortion is I would never tell another woman to go ahead and carry the baby and give it away. If you're going to carry that child, keep it. Otherwise, my opinion is have an abortion. That's it. And I don't judge. I heard about a young girl who went to school with my younger son. She used to come over and play with him, and she got pregnant in high school. This is a country family, and they're not educated people. And I thought this was so great. She had the baby, and her aunt and uncle raised it. But the baby always knew who her mother was. She was in her life. She went to every appointment. When she got old enough, and the kid would come and spend time with her mother, and it was not a big deal. And I thought that was such a beautiful thing. And I think there are families now that do that all the time. It's not such a big deal to have a child out of wedlock. But that's it.
How did it feel all those years to not know where your daughter was and to not know her?
I would cry on her birthday every year. I would cry my heart out. And I would fantasize, and I would look at young women and wonder, could that be her? Could that be her? And unlike a lot of people, I told people. I didn't keep it a secret. And I would say, wow, I have a daughter who's 15. And, it probably freaked some people out, but I didn't care. I didn't want to buy into the stigma. I felt like I had no options. I couldn't get birth control. I couldn't get an abortion. And then I couldn't keep her. And everything was supposed to be a big secret, although everybody knew in the town. It was a big scandal. So it was horrible. And now I think if I'd only known then, you'll meet her. You'll meet her. Someday you'll meet her. And she grew up believing she would know me someday, because it turns out my father knew her father. My father arranged adoptions all the time. Her grandmother, who's now dead, told her that my father literally handed her to her father. And I know they knew each other. I'm positive, because so my father had a degree in psychiatry, but he was a GP, and he used to drive over to the county. They lived across the river. Oh, and when I had her, my father insisted I use a doctor across the river in Kingston where nobody knew us. And so that's where the adoption stuff happened. I know my father would go to this court for hearings about prisoners, the criminally insane, about whether they were allowed to leave or not. And because I remember going with him, and I would bring a book and sit in the car and read while he went in and did. I never went in there. And her father was a judge. He was very young for a judge. And and they were both Jews. Back then, the Jews hung with the Jews, and it was very, especially in where I grew up. And and then her grandmother confirmed it, that he knew them. And she had a good childhood until her father died when she was 8 of cancer. She adored him. But And I also guess I thought if she's raised Jewish, I'll have something in common with her. We have a lot in common. Just freaky stuff. It's incredible. I did not raise her, but she is so much like me and my people. It isn't funny. Yeah, and my son adored her, and she adored him, and he died. And she was as devastated as I was. So he died in 2015, March, and his wife was pregnant, and I have a grandson named after him. He was born about 6 weeks after he died, and I have this little man now to love and help raise. I just want to be his best friend. And my mother was so good to me when I got pregnant. And that's when I discovered who she really was. And she was the best friend I ever had in my life. And she didn't live long enough to meet Amy. But Amy knows all about her. And she gave me my mother gave me a lot of unconditional love and strength. And it's the only reason I could not be self-destructive. But
Did you ever talk about the adoption with your parents afterward?
no, especially not my father. His whole attitude was, forget this ever happened. No, my mother and I didn't really talk about it either. No. Well, we didn't really talk about the abortion either.
Was it something you would have wanted to talk to her or them about?
I don't know. There was so much shame and guilt. Not about the abortion. Really, not. But about the baby. Yeah. It was such a sad thing to go through. When you carry a child, I don't know if you have kids, for 9 months, at least you fall in love with that child. You feel them. And then you don't even get to see them. You don't even, and the hormones, and it was really brutal. And I was treated like shit by all the nurses, except for one. The staff, they'd bring babies up, taking them to their mothers when I was recovering, and leave them right outside my door crying. And it was so unbelievable. And in the birth mothers group that I was in, I suggested we all do a writing project to do a radio show, and it never got on the air because the radio program went under. It's a long story, but we did create this thing about our birth experiences, the similarities back then, late 60s, well, all before, early 60s, late 60s, even after it became legal, mostly before. Just horrific the way we were all treated. It's incredible. I hope that doesn't happen anymore. I don't think it does. So, but it was great to meet those women, and we gave each other so much, and it helped us all with the guilt and the shame and the sadness. A lot of the women in the group found their kids. Not everybody had a great story. Amy and I are one of the best scenarios. And I think maybe it was because her father knew my father. Her parents read her books about being adopted and said, you're special, we chose you, and someday they didn't demonize me, and they didn't demonize her. And I think that really was wonderful. And when we first talked on the phone, I said, how is your mother with all this? Because her father had died. She said, oh, she thinks it's great. She wants us to go on Oprah. I said, I'm not doing that. She said, I'm not either. I said, but would you please tell her that I want to talk to her. I want to reach out to her. I don't want her to feel threatened by this. So I waited a couple days, and I called her mother. And I said, I'm a mother. I have 2 boys, and I'm not trying to be Amy's mother. I just want to know her and her to know me. And you're her mother. You raised her. And she was a little threatened. And then she said, well, I have one question for you. Are you stable? I said, am I stable? Well, I've been in the same job for, many, many years. I've been with the same man I've been with my husband for like 40 some years. I live in the same house for, I don't know, is that what you call stable? I have the same friends, she said, I said, why do you ask? And she said, well, good, because Amy's not. Amy's complicated. She's complicated. And whenever she would get really depressed, she'd call me. Her mother would say, call Sarah, she can help you. And I would listen and just ask the right questions and be there. Because to me, she's a miracle. It doesn't matter what she does. She's a miracle that I know her, because I was told I never would and that I didn't deserve to and all that nonsense. So we are very close. I'm very lucky that way. The friend who had adopted some kids said, you need to find your daughter and I'm going to help you. You're going to come to this meeting. There's a birth mothers group. And what blew my mind in that group was I had always been told, don't you dare go looking for your daughter. You'll ruin her life. You stay away. You have no rights. And so I did. I stayed away. But then, like I said, the New York State Registry, I put my name out there. I thought that's not chasing her. That's saying, I'm here. Come and get me. And at that group, there were adoptees talking about wanting to find their parents. And there were adoptive parents talking about how wonderful it was when their kids found their birth families. And I'd never heard that before. So then I started reading the books and joining the group and finding out it wasn't that black and white. And there was an illegal underground where a few of the women I know in the group paid a lot of money to find their kids. And then they showed up and said, hi, I'm your birth parent. It didn't go that well for any of them. That was weird. My story was perfect because we were both looking. And the birth mother group was wonderful. And it had a life of its own. It lasted for a certain amount of time. And then it wasn't there anymore. And there's a connection with some of us. We see each other around. We used to have reunions together. But one of the main people died. And after she died, I haven't heard from any of the others. And it's okay. It served its purpose. It was wonderful. But, and I have those notes from everybody's stories. I have all the written answers and we edited them down. We made up 13 questions and everyone answered and then we edited them down. And then we went up to TC3 and recorded them. That's a community college, because one of the women was a professor. And that was such an eye-opener to meet that group, because there were college professors, there were country women, there were hippies, there were educated, there was a whole range of people, but we all had the same experience where we were told, we were garbage and bad. And don't you ever try to find your child. And ridiculous. The writing itself was so powerful. To put it down, to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Just to have that recognition and acceptance and validation that, wow, look what happened to us, and it wasn't our fault, and we're not bad, and everything we felt was legitimate, Society has changed. The sexual revolution did happen, and it's all different now. And I'm glad, and I want it to stay that way. I really do.
When you got pregnant the second time and went to get the abortion, what was your thought process at that point? And this time it was like your own choice.
I was terrified that I wouldn't get it, that I'd have to go through the same nightmare again. I was just really wanted it done. And it was early, quickly, safely, no problems. When I did get pregnant, when I was married to my, years later, my pregnancies were very, very difficult emotionally, mentally, because the first time was a nightmare. It was horrible. And when my first son was born, I wouldn't put him down. And my mother-in-law came and said, "You put that baby down." I said, "No," because it was like somewhere in my head, I thought somebody's going to snatch him from me. And then he was snatched by life, but we were very close. But I did not enjoy pregnancy at all, either one. Didn't enjoy it. It's I don't know. I got through it, but didn't love it. Some women love it, some women don't. Well, with my daughter, oh my God. My mother was a nurse, and so she drove me to the hospital when my water broke. Across the river, it was like 45 minutes away. And in the car, I hadn't been prepared at all. There were no books like what to expect when you're nothing, no Lamaze. And all the women in my birth mothers group were treated the same way. Nobody was educated about birth. So my mother said, "I'll come and be with you. Don't worry, I'm going to be right there." And I kept saying, "It hurts. And aren't they going to knock me out?" And she said, "I'll be right there." So she dropped me off. They took me in. She parked the car and they wouldn't let her in. Because in 1968, they only let husbands in. And they barely did that. Even though she was a nurse, they wouldn't let her in. So I kept begging for my mother. And I didn't know what was happening. And then they took me and they shaved my pubic hair. Nobody had told me they were going to do that. They gave me an enema. I'd never had an enema in my life. Nobody told me. It was like a rape. And they were so mean to me. And I kept begging for my mother and crying. And a couple of nurses came over and said, "You be quiet. You're upsetting our married patients." And then there were two people who were kind. One was a janitor, an older black man mopping the floor, and he was kind to me. And then the shift changed, and this white-haired woman came on. And that's where I was starting to give birth. And I said, "I want my mother." And she said, "Honey, I'll be your mother." And she held my hand. She was so kind. I can still cry thinking about her. I'm sure she's long gone. And I kept saying, "Knock me out, knock me out. I thought you were going to knock me out." I don't know where I got that from. In the movies, maybe. And they said, "You have to deliver the baby before we can knock you out." So the head was crowning, and I remember the mask, and they did an episiotomy, and they gave me a shot to dry up my milk. And my father wasn't going to come and see me because he didn't want to be recognized. He was very well known in our town. And he showed up with a stuffed animal, a little puppy, beagle puppy, because we had gotten a beagle puppy and had to get rid of it because I was pregnant and everything, and we had to give him away because they couldn't deal with it. And he got me this little stuffed puppy, and he gave it to me. And years later, when my son was born, my husband brought that little puppy to the hospital, and we put it in the little bassinet with Jake. And I said, "That was so beautiful." He said, "I didn't know it was anything special. It was just this stuffed animal I'd had when he met me." So he didn't know what it represented. And I don't know what happened to it. It's gone. It's just a toy. It doesn't matter.
What did it mean for you when your father showed up?
It was good. I mean, I was touched that he would take a risk being seen. A big scandal. My mother was 100% there. And then when I had to sign the adoption papers, my mother took me again across the river, the lawyer's offices, And that's where I learned that the father was a lawyer and the mother had been to college, and that they were nice people and Jewish and all this. And my mother said something about how beautiful the baby was. And I thought, wow, she must have gone and looked at it, but we didn't talk about it. And then when I got to be old enough where one of my first friends had a baby and we all went to the hospital, anybody could walk up and see the babies. I don't know if that's true anymore. I don't know if that's still true, but they used to line them up and anybody could go and look. And I believe my mother went and saw her. I do. It was very sad for everybody. But having an abortion was not a big deal, in my opinion. And I feel bad for women that have to get illegal and dirty and unsafe, expensive. It shouldn't be that way. But that's the way. I'm scared about what's coming down the road, too. Really am.
Why do you want to share your stories?
To get rid of the shame and the guilt and I don't know. I just feel strongly that women are victimized for a lot of this, and the men aren't. And it shouldn't be that way. I support women, either if they're single mothers or married mothers or don't want to be mothers. Just pro-women. That's it. I'm pro-choice.
This is Melissa, and thanks again for listening. You can continue to listen to our stories online through our website by subscribing on iTunes or SoundCloud or your favorite podcast app. And if you rate and review our podcast on iTunes, it helps new listeners find us by boosting our iTunes ranking. And remember, the Abortion Diary needs your support. Help the Abortion Diary continue its work and share our stories by donating, and consider supporting us with a monthly gift. I'll be back next week with a new story. New stories are posted every Tuesday. Until then, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and Instagram. Listen for us next week.